Hello again and welcome back to our course on Project 2019. In this section we're going to look at the basics of assigning resources to tasks. In the previous section we set up a few resources for the wedding project. Now clearly there are going to be many more, but let's switch back to Gantt chart view using the buttons towards the right hand end of the status bar, and I'm going to choose one of the tasks and assign resources to it. So I'm going to select the Agree Budget and Approach task. I'm going to right click and select Assign Resources. And this brings up the Assign Resources dialog box, and you can see a list of the available resources. So I'm going to assign the bride and the groom to this task. I'm going to work on the principle that the bride and groom are arranging this wedding themselves. So to assign a resource, all I need to do is select that resource and then click Assign. And you'll see I get a little tick next to the name. Now when I assign a resource to a task list like that, it doesn't automatically close the Assign Resources dialog. You note that there is a separate close button in the dialog box. But what you can see is first of all the number of units. Well, 100% represents one bride. So there's one bride attached to this task, which is just as well really, and the cost of the bride working on that task is 0. Don't forget that the rate for the bride chargeable to this project is $0 per hour. So if she's working on that task for 10 days, then she's still not going to charge us any money for doing it. Now, one very important point I'd like you to bear in mind here, and this is going to become increasingly important later on in the course, is that 100% means that the bride is working on the task full time. Now in reality it may well be that she's not working full time and that she's actually doing her day job most of the time, and she's just spending a certain amount of time working on, in this case, the budget and approach to her wedding. But for the purposes of this particular project, and this will not be the case for the bathroom refit, but for the purposes of this project, all I'm going to do is treat that as 100% as being all the time that she has available. That doesn't mean to say it's a 40-hour week or an 8-hour day or anything else. It just means that all of the time she's got available, she's going to spend on that task while the task is in progress. Now, fortunately, while that task is in progress, she doesn't actually have any other tasks on the wedding, so she can spend all of her time on that. If I want to assign a second resource, and the most obvious second resource to assign is the groom, I'm going to select the groom and do the same thing, click Assign. And then I'm going to click on Close, and the bride and groom are now assigned to that task. And you can see in the Gantt chart we have our initials, bride and groom. Now, one of the consequences of assigning the bride and groom to that task is to do with the amount of work involved in that task. I pointed out to you much earlier on in the course that when you look at work, particularly for a new project, in the work column there was a 0 hours of work because we had no resources assigned to that task. As far as Project 2019 is concerned, we've now taken a 10-day task and it defaults to an 8-hour working day. So 10 days for 8 hours a day is 80 hours. And when I assigned 2 people to it full time, that is 160 hours of work. So as far as Project 2019 is concerned, these 2 resources are going to do 160 hours of work on this particular task. Now when you do this, you effectively increase the amount of work from 0 hours to 160 hours. And Project 2019 offers you alternative ways of dealing with the change that you've made. And this little exclamation mark over in that first column gives you a little drop down and offers you alternative ways of dealing with a situation where you've increased the amount of work in a task. As far as the wedding project is concerned, this is of little interest really, because we're not really going to charge for the bride and groom's time. So the costings, and in fact the scheduling of this, is not going to be changed by the fact that we've assigned 2 resources to that task. We're not going to say that because the bride and groom are working on it, it's only going to take half the time. We decided it was a 10-day task and that was it. We don't make it a 5-day task because 2 people are working on it. That set of arguments about work and duration and the amount of work in a task and so on is what we're going to look at in the next section. And I hope that that section will explain to you why we get these options here, and in fact which of these options is the right one to choose. But on this occasion, we're going to go for the default option, which is increase the amount of work but keep the same duration. When we do that, Project 2019 is quite happy. The warning has gone away. We've got our 160 hours of work, and we've still got a 10-day task, and the bride and groom are still assigned to that task. Now, my main concern over the next few sections is going to be the scheduling of this wedding and the scheduling of projects in general. And in fact, it's the assignment of work resources that will be a key factor. So for the rest of this section, I'm just quickly going to show you a couple of other ways of assigning resources, and we're going to assign those other two resources that we set up, one cost resource and one material resource, just to go through the basics of dealing with those. We'll be coming back to cost and material resources later though, as I really do want to concentrate on work resources and scheduling now. So let's jump down to the photography section. And suppose I want to assign the photographer to the Select and Book Photographer task. So essentially I'm going to assign the cost of the photographer to this task. So let's jump up to that Resource tab and select Assign Resources. And that brings up the Assign Resources dialog box. And from here it's very easy for me to just select the photographer and click on Assign. Now don't forget that when I assign the photographer, we don't have a cost assigned because it's a cost resource and we haven't specified what that cost is until we actually assign it to the task. Now we're going to allow for the fact that the photographer we're going to use is going to charge right about $1,500. So let's add $1,500 as the cost. And you can see just behind the dialog box, we now have $1,500 added next to the photographer resource. Having done that, I'm going to click on Close, and we can see how that cost appears on the Gantt chart. It is worth pointing out at this point that what you see on this Gantt chart, the words to the right of the blocks in this case, this is all customizable, and we will be looking at customizing the Gantt chart later on in this course. Now the last assignment I'd like to make here is the assignment of the rings. So I'm going to go to Select and Buy Rings, and I'm going to right click, and I'm going to use this third approach to get to my Assign Resources dialog box. And on this occasion I'm going to choose Wedding Ring, and I'm going to actually assign the number of rings because we're actually going to buy 2 rings. And you can see that as I do that, if you look behind on the Gantt chart, it now has 2 rings in brackets. Project 2019 has also recognised that each wedding ring costs $500 and has put a cost in of $1,000 for the 2 rings. The other important thing to bear in mind here is that I could at the same time assign the bride and groom to this task as well. So if I select bride and hold down the control key and select groom and click on assign, I've now assigned them to this task as well. And I can now click on close. So I've now got 3 resources assigned to that task. I've got the bride and groom, which are work resources. I've got the bride and groom, and I also have 2 wedding rings. So that's the basics of assignments. In the next section, we're going to turn our attention back to work, and we're going to look at work with particular reference to different types of task. That's it for this section. I will see you then.